Okay, so I'm here, but am I really me? Or am I about to burst into a sea of badly aged CGI? Doctor Who Overdue review, two-parter time, and that means that we have arrived at the Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. I have always kind of contended that this is an underrated story, because I feel like it should be talked about more often than it is. It's not amazing, I wouldn't put it like in the top tier or anything, but for what it is aiming to be and do, it does it really, really well. And I kind of wish it got cited more as like a really strong example of the integration of themes and the execution of a two-parter, of pacing one over 2 episodes with a limited cast in limited setting. It's just really well put together. I feel like it doesn't get a lot of credit for that. So this is the one where the Doctor takes Amy and Rory to a castle where they are mining acid for who knows. They may have said, but honestly, it doesn't matter. There's acid. That's all that matters. And because this stuff is so dangerous to work with, the people basically have flesh avatars. They call them their gangers. There is a somewhat organic, they're not entirely sure, they know that it works, a compound called the flesh that they can basically tap into and then control, which allows them to stay in a safe space while their ganger goes out and does things in dangerous spots, and if it falls into acid and melts away, no harm, no foul. It's just a lump of matter being controlled by somebody, and that person's perfectly fine. Everything's good. Yeah, except it's not, because the Doctor is very quick to notice the flesh is growing. It's alive. It is a living thing. It gets brushed off. Well, yeah, it's no more sentient than moss. Well, And soon we have the somewhat predictable and what you would expect given that initial setup issue of the gangers start walking around on their own without needing the original people to be plugged into them. So now we have a gangers versus humans scenario where people are literally faced with their literal selves and are in conflict. And the Doctor trying to deal with all that. This thing's really good. It's not breaking a ton of new ground. It is ultimately a Base Under Siege style story. It has very limited locations, and the cast is very small. The few bits of CGI don't look great. They're not badly designed, which can sometimes be the issue when you get into things like the Lazarus Experiment, but you can very much tell this is on a TV budget. So, I mean, there's all that going on, but it just does what it's doing really well, because this type of story gets told in science fiction rather often, but usually it's something that we would be dealing with clones or robots. And doing either one of those kind of tips the argument of, are these people, do they deserve rights, harder in one direction or the other by its nature. Not to say that, the resolution can't land wherever the writer wants it to, but when you're doing robots becoming sentient, there's a certain disconnect for an audience because, well, are you saying I should be nicer to the coffee maker in my kitchen? Because they're inherently less human. Whereas if you're dealing with clones, an actual true literal clone, then, well, yeah, you made a human being. That's a person. And the gangers actually fall nicely in between while still tackling a lot of the same themes and questions that those kinds of stories in sci-fi settings tend to ask. Because the gangers have all of the memories and the experiences of the people who had been plugged into them and created them as their avatars in their head. As far as they are concerned, that was their life. Yet, at the same time, they are still, in some ways, physically distinct. You can differentiate. You can tell who is who. I mean, they don't necessarily have a ton of ways to do it in the situation they're in the story, but there are ways to do it. So, you have something that, by all rationale of what they are physically composed of, is not a person. And is certainly not the person they look like. Yet, They are an exact copy. And I love the way that that is played here. The way that characters especially interact with each other, because yes, we get a point where the gangers decide that they need to take out the humans, but it's not because the gangers are inherently evil and they were just pretending to manipulate. No. They're making the decision that the human versions of them are also making to some degree. And everything tracks really well, especially with the way some characters are really unnerved by the fact that they are looking at something that looks like them but it isn't them. And other characters kind of soften, kind of like find value or find some connection in that. I love that there is a diversity of reactions and responses and thought processes between the different characters, and we've also got the mirror image of those between the humans and the gangers. I like that. Of course, inevitably, we end up with a ganger doctor, and I really do enjoy those interactions of the doctor, and I'm going to call him John Smith because that's what he calls himself, except that wasn't actually the ganger. That was the doctor because he played a little quick switch, whatever. But moving on. So I really enjoy the two of them. And it's actually, if you stop and think about it, it's kind of a really cool idea because we've had the issue before with things like the Dr. Donna that humans cannot contain everything that is a Time Lord inside them. Apparently, though, the flesh can. It's a little wonky when John Smith first forms and he's trying to comprehend all these years and these multiple lives and everything. But after a little while, he's fine. Like, stop and think about that. The flesh can actually process and deal with a Time Lord. That's kind of cool. It doesn't really get remarked on, but that struck me this time. I'm like, oh, that's nifty. And I like how the Doctor is instantly on the same wavelength as John Smith, right down to their messing with Amy. And watching it this time and knowing that that twist was coming, not that it's especially hard to spot. That's one thing that I'll say, like, maybe slight weak. Pretty much every twist of, oh, the person who you thought was a human was a ganger or vice versa, though they're all pretty easy to spot early on, but the plot is built in such a way that you being surprised by that doesn't make or break the story. If you catch on to it too early, maybe you get annoyed that the characters haven't, but the story doesn't pivot and depend on you being surprised by these twists. So even though most of these, if not all of them, you can spot and call and are maybe telegraphed a little more than they need to be, that doesn't break the narrative or the story. At least I don't think it does. But I did wonder, going back and watching again, knowing that the Doctor basically switched with his ganger to see what Amy did and how she reacted and responded to that. I wondered, is this going to feel like it was something he needed to do, or is this going to feel like a twist for the sake of a twist? But it did need to happen, not necessarily logistically. The logistical reason that the Doctor gives for doing that and pulling that particular move is a little vague and a little shaky, but it's massively important thematically. It is important to the understanding of where things land with the flesh that the audience is supposed to be on their side and believe that, yes, they need to be recognized as people, and the fact that they were being cranked out and then thrown away is wrong, really kind of needs Amy to go through the experience that she goes through of distrusting the one she believes is the ganger, being so certain, and then having that flip revealed on her and like getting teared up at realizing the ganger one is going to die and feeling probably about as close as she felt in terms of the pain of having seen the Doctor die back in The Impossible Astronaut. So seeing her journey is incredibly important thematically. So it absolutely did need to happen. If you're someone who doesn't think theming should trump logistics, then maybe you still take issue with it. At the end of the day, as long as it doesn't completely fail to make any kind of sense, I think strong theming is slightly more important than just the logistical, everything fits together sort of thing. And I think this forms the balance of that quite well. All the performances are good. This does what I like a two-parter to do. We have an established core group of new characters, and we spend time with them and get to know them. That, when two-parters do that properly, is what a big part of what I love about two-parters. It's one of the things I love about things like The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit, is you really get to know these people, and they feel like more than just guest stars. And that is the case here. The performances are all great, and I'm not gonna lie, I choked up a little bit with the father, because one of the people who's there, he's a dad. And it's his son's 5th birthday, and the ganger feels that exact same affection, and the real one dies. And the ganger is now effectively his father. Now, I remember back when it first aired, I wondered, is that a little cheap? Because they're avoiding the difficult question of, if they both live, does the ganger have any parental right? I mean, legally, probably not, but like, have any moral right to asked to see what is, as far as he's concerned, his son. And they kind of dodge that by having the real one die. Except that, while that is kind of the case, I still like it because the performance from him is really, really great. And despite the fact that the child actor, when we get a holo call, the child actor is not good. he's a 5-year-old boy. He's a child actor. He's as awkward and bad as child actors tend to be at that age. But the guy, the father, especially as the ganger, sells it. Not just the love, but selling the realization that he now has a responsibility to this boy because his real father is gone. So it's not just that he has love for this boy. He has a responsibility. This means something, and it's all in the face. All the acting's in the face. And I did choke up. It was so good, it overrode the fact that this kid on the holo call, not good. So, like, the kid didn't choke me up at all. The dad did, though. Yeah, a little bit. And I just feel like this is really well put together. It's really well constructed for the themes that it's dealing with, for the type of for the way it's chosen to format the story in terms of, like, we got to get off the base, there's trouble, which again is not atypical for Doctor Who, but it's just well executed on pretty much every level. The only major criticism I had really was the CGI, and like, they did the best that they could. There's a few things that maybe aren't quite as tight as they could be, but overall this is a really complete package. And the other thing I want to give this thing credit for is the way in which it ties into the overarching story that's going on in this series. So I have commented in the past about my extreme distaste for what I have termed the mystery box story arcs, which means something that we either keep seeing or keep hearing mentioned that doesn't get explained until series finale. Now, Series 6 is already a little bit weird because they basically have a mid-series finale, but anyway, examples before, like Bad Wolf, Torchwood, Vote Saxon, the planets moving, and, you know, Rose showing up in Series 4. Series 5 had the cracks in time, and I dislike that format in the first place, but one of the main things I really don't like about it is the reminders of, ooh, this thing. They just don't get integrated into the stories. They just show up, like, as a reminder, ooh, thing. Now, Series 6 does have that. It has that in the form of, the eye patch woman. So, it does have a mystery box thing going on, but one of the issues that I tend to have with that is the failure to integrate. So, oftentimes, the things that, quote-unquote, especially under Moffat, it actually happens under Moffat more than it happened under Davies, but things that move the series arc forward are very detachable from the episodes in which they happen. I think my best example of that is the Silurian two-parter from Series 5, because at the end of that, Rory dies and is swallowed up by the time crack. Now, that's actually really important. This is a big deal. This matters. But it has almost nothing to do with the story that's going on. The fact that he was killed and sucked into that could have been tacked on to literally any story. It didn't have to happen here. There's no reason for it to happen here. This just happened to be the episode where they did it. It's very disconnected, and that frustrates me. Here, the thing that moves the overall series thing forward is the revelation that Amy is a ganger, and real Amy, somewhere else, captured, is pregnant and about to give birth. Now, these things have been hinted at up to this point, and the hints being dropped have been very much what I've been saying. They're just in there, And actually, you'd be forgiven for getting what episodes they even happen in and how, because they're so completely detached. Here, they take a story that, as far as the story being told, of the gangers, them becoming sentient, the conflict, and then the gangers making the argument for their rights, that story is a completely self-contained story. And yet, it feeds directly into what is revealed about Amy, because the flesh, the Doctor had to learn about the flesh in order to figure out what was going on with this version of Amy. He knew something was wrong, but he needed to learn more. And that's how we got into this situation. So it builds directly off it and then thrusts us into the series story and the next episode. This is one of the best integrations of what is an otherwise standalone story into the overall series arc, because usually they're super detached, and that is not the case here. And I wanted to shout that out, because that is something that 9 times out of 10 on Doctor Who I don't feel is done especially well and tends to bug me. So yeah, Rebel Flesh and the Almost People, I think it is quite good. But what do you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Stuff to do as well. Patreon, and liking and subscribing and sharing, all of which are very helpful and greatly, greatly appreciated. I hope everyone's having a great holiday season as we get towards the end of the year. And, like I said, tons of stuff down there for you to click on, go places, do things, but you don't have to, because at the end of the day, folks, you are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.